we're going to hear a great example of how data and analytics can be used in business, but specifically running a Major League Baseball team. Before we get started, I would like to introduce Ashley Cassad. She is president of Springfield Hospitals for Cox Health. Please welcome Ashley.
Thank you, Marty. So we are so excited today to be a sponsor for the SBJ Connect event. We typically think of ourselves at Cox Health as improving the community, and while most of the time that's through providing health care, sometimes it's through helping connect our partners and our other community members to make this community a better place. So I moved to Springfield from Baltimore, but I grew up in West Plains. And so when you grow up in West Plains, Springfield and the Ozarks, this area, this is the big booming metropolis. And so when I moved here, people were like, you're just moving to a really big small town. You'll know everyone really soon. And I was like, that's not possible. Springfield's huge. They have a mall and Chili's and all those things I didn't have in West Plains. And so anyways, after moving here 4 years ago, it took about 18 months, and I was like, oh, that's right, I do. I'd see the same community leaders at fundraisers that keep showing up again and again, and I see the same community leaders at Chamber showing up for events. And whether I like it or not, sometimes I see those same people at the grocery store at 7 a.m. when it looks like I haven't brushed my hair in a week and when I have 3 feral kids running around. But it's great because you really do get to connect with people here and see them again and again. And so what I would really challenge you all today is find someone in this room to make time to connect with again within the next month. And set it up this week, because otherwise what we all do is say, hey, it was so great getting to meet you. We should go to happy hour soon. We should talk about it. Maybe we can find a way to partner. Maybe we can find a way to make both our organizations better. And the next thing you know, a month goes by and then 2, and then you see them 6 months down the road and you start the whole process over again. And so my challenge to you is this week, within 1 week, go ahead and make that time. Make the coffee date or lunch date or happy hour to sit down and really say, how can we partner together? Because we have tons of experts in this area, right? We have tons of major leaders in all sorts of sectors, healthcare, technology, manufacturing. So we have the experts in our community, and we need to figure out better ways to partner together so that we can continue to just develop those relationships and do it when we see each other at the grocery store or at our next fundraiser. So excited to have you guys all here. Hope today ends up being a great day, and make sure to find a way to connect with someone and get that scheduled this week. Thank you, guys.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Chad Pline. I'm with KY3. Brian McDonough, our general manager, I guess couldn't be here because he came up to my desk and said, hey, would you do this for me? But on behalf of Brian McDonough and KY3, we are thrilled to be a sponsor of the keynote speaker this morning for you. I've been with KY3 for 18 years, and I knew about the reputation that we had in the Ozarks well before I came here. Born and raised in St. Louis, a huge Cardinals fan, I ended up working at Channel 5 in St. Louis, and there were some reporters and photographers who came along the way. Think of it as minor league baseball through the smaller markets, working their way up to the big leagues. And in the big leagues in St. Louis, they told me if you have a chance to work for KY3 in Springfield, Missouri, do yourself a favor and go. That was, 25 years ago. And now this has been our home for 18 years. We have a son who is born here. He's a senior in high school right now, and a daughter who is 13. And this is home, and it's because of community. It's something different. I've been at different cities around Missouri and worked, and it's just something different here in Springfield and the Ozarks, and that is that community. So when Brian McDonough started as a general manager at KY3, he sat all of us down in his office, and he pointed to the TV, and he said, the future of television is not going to be on a TV. And all of us looked at him and thought, first off, you're crazy, and second off, you're taking my job away. What are you talking about? He said, well, think about where we are and where digital is going. He had a forethought, innovation. Traditional media on the television set at 5, 6, 9, and 10, you would watch the news. The stories would come on, a press conference from 7 o'clock, possibly some kind of a shooting at 1 o'clock in the morning. You would wait until the news came on and the talking head would come on your television at home and tell you what happened. But the way the future is going, that's not how it's going to be any longer. The future is on your cell phones. It's on your apps, on your smart TVs. You want that information immediately. And the first day that Brian McDonough became the general manager of KY3, he started innovating the way that we could stay relevant. Innovation is change, but it's not a 180 change, it's adapting. And innovation through partnerships takes it one step further, and it combines the community, which is very important to KY3. At the very beginning of our newscast, it says #1 in the Ozarks, and that's for a reason. It's not just the ratings, which are very good, by the way, but it's also because we are involved in the community. Next week, we're going to Eureka Springs to have one of our weather school stops, where the community comes out to fill up a high school gymnasium. We've been to Cassville, we've been to Licking, Missouri, we've been to Warsaw, Missouri, the small towns where we connect with the community. But along with just us signing autographs, we bring out the first responders, the police, the mayors, the superintendents, so that the people in that community can meet their leaders, ask questions, just get to know their face so they can say that we are a part of this community. We want to be involved in this community. So at KY3, it's how can we take it one step further? And when SBJ brought up this Connect event, Brian McDonough said KY3 wants to be a part of it. We want to be able to be a part of these lives because our businesses here are our backbone. There are smart people. There are people who are making a difference in and out of our communities, and let's bring them all together and see if they could innovate through partnerships, change through talking to one another. Not change 180, but adapt, network, find out what we need to do to make sure that Springfield and the Ozarks stays relevant. And that brings us to our keynote speaker today, because innovation is key to all of us, not just businesses like yourselves, CFOs, CEOs, and not just at KY3 or other media. We're all looking to put employees in the best place possible for them to succeed. One way that they do it at the Major League Baseball level as well as at KY3 is analytics. You look at numbers, you crunch them down, you try and figure out how can I put this person in the best place to succeed. Back in 2008, the St. Louis Cardinals changed, and they had a department created, and a young man who had been working for the organization for 2 years was put into that department. And that's our keynote speaker today. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President and General Manager of the St. Louis Cardinals, Mike Girsch.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This is a great opportunity. I hope many of you were here for the 60 at 60 this morning. It was really well done. They are all exceptionally good public speakers. So
Mike.
The bar is set very high. So I hope
Your mic's on.
All right. Is this better? There we go. All right. I'm going to assume you heard all that, even though I'm loud. I've been told before, so I'll assume you at least sort of heard it. But one of the, I believe it was Dr. Taylor this morning, talked about people, when you reach a level in an organization, some people think that the organization exists to benefit them as the CEO or president or leader of the organization, when in fact that you exist to benefit the organization. I think that couldn't be more true than with something like the St. Louis Cardinals. We are basically a public trust. Like my only job is to make sure that I take good enough care, and we as a group take good enough care of this organization, that all the fans who put their blood, sweat, and tears and lifelong passion into it continue to get enjoyment out of it. My job is so much better because of the number of fans that we have and the passion our fans have. I have friends with other teams in baseball who talk about, our one fan got mad, but we gave him a call and he's okay now. And like, that's not a good place to be. It's not a fun way to run an organization. The passion that we have from our fan base. I was speaking to a few people earlier this morning who are season ticket holders to the Cardinals. I just did a 3-hour drive from St. Louis here this morning, so anyone who's just got season tickets to someplace 3 hours away is serious about their fandom. So, given that, I understand and I can appreciate the frustration that some of you have had over the last 18 months. Disappointment, frustration, sadness, anger, list the adjectives, and I feel the same way. This is my 19th season. I started with the Cardinals in 2006. So this is my 19th season with the Cardinals. The first 17 were really kind of embarrassingly positive in terms of playoffs and World Series, and got to be part of 2 parades, and I have a couple rings, and the last 18 months have been really a struggle. And for those of you who are huge Cardinal fans and are in the crowd and are either secretly or maybe not so secretly wondering, like, what's this Girsch guy got to do to lose his job? Like, I get it. Like, I'm a Bears and a Bulls fan, and I'm ready to fire the offensive coordinator of the Bears after 2 games, and I understand how that passion goes. But we really do appreciate the support. We really do understand that the organization has set an expectation, the fans have an expectation, and we have an expectation of being a playoff team, and that's our goal, is to get back there quickly. There is change coming. Whether or not that meets everyone's definition of what the right change is, we'll all see together. But we are on the path back to where we feel like we need to be. So I am going to talk a little bit about analytics. Oh, did this one just turn on? Oh, there you go. I'm going to talk about analytics as discussed. I want to start out telling you a little bit about my path to being the GM of the Cardinals. It starts with analytics. I was, like probably some of you, I was the nerdy kid who liked math at a young age. I taught myself spreadsheets because I wanted to win my fantasy baseball and fantasy football teams. I was a math major in college, not really because I wanted to be like a math professor or teacher. I just wanted to calculate slugging percentage and ERA faster and whatnot. I worked in consulting for a couple years. I went back, got my MBA, worked in consulting for a couple more years. I was probably a year or so into my second consulting gig. I was at a quarterly conference, I think we called them, where everyone from the Chicago office came together and talked about the projects they were working on and kind of what they were learning and what their clients were doing. And I remember sitting in the crowd listening to these people and thinking, I will never care about Salesforce reengineering enough to do this the rest of my life. Like, I don't understand how these people can speak so excitedly about post-merger integration. This is not going to work. Like, I like consulting, but this isn't going to work. And I started thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. And the one thing I wanted to be when I grew up was the GM of a baseball team. And at the time, that up until that moment, it had never made any real effort to do it. But this is in 2004, probably 2005. The book Moneyball had come out. The idea that nerdy people had a future in sports was at least out there in the universe. Whether or not it was real or not, I didn't know. So I created a little model to value Major League Baseball draft picks. So in the baseball draft, we draft high school and college players. You can draft either ones, and junior college. And you can break players down basically into hitters and position players and pitchers. And so I did this, I did a little discounted cash flow valuing each of those player categories based on when you draft a player, you sign them to a signing bonus, and then you control them according to the rules of the collective bargaining agreement in baseball. You control them for about their first 6 years of their career at salaries below what the fair market value is. So you can say you invest some money up front, and then you save money over time. Like, that's like an asset that I've learned about in business school and in consulting, and I can put a value on that. And I wrote a thesis on how to value first-round draft picks, comparing high school hitters to college pitchers and whatnot. I spammed baseball. I did not know anyone in baseball. I had like a friend from business school's old college roommate dated a guy who worked for the Rockies, which was not all that helpful. I think he was an intern at the Rockies too, so it wasn't even like he was a useful person to know. So I spammed baseball. I sent emails to john.moselak and moselak.john and jmoselak at cardinals.com, at stlcardinals.com, at cardinalsbaseball.com. I don't know how many of you guys remember Hotmail accounts. I had a Hotmail account I was doing it from. So I'd hit send, and then I'd wait like 5 minutes, and I'd reload the page, and I'd have all those mailer whatever would come back saying this email doesn't exist, and I'd check them off my list, and I'd be like, woohoo, one of them got through, and I'd go on to the next team and terrorize some other poor sap. And I did that for all 30 teams. And I'm born and raised in Chicago. I sent FedExes of my report to the Cubs and White Sox, because you have to open a FedEx, right? You don't have to open an email. You can delete that. But a FedEx, like that could be important. Never heard from the Cubs or White Sox. I actually didn't hear from most of the teams. I got a handful of thanks, don't bother us emails back. And I got 2 or 3 people who were interested in talking more. And one of them was Mo. And somewhere along the way, Mo was in a good mood on the day I happened to send an email, and he actually opened the attachment, and it ended up changing my life. So now, fast forward, I talked to Mo. I realized that like all the time I've wasted reading baseball and doing baseball studies on my own is actually I can have a conversation with the assistant GM of a major league team and not feel like an idiot. I end up doing a little bit more work. It's now the end of the 2005 season. I, through an acquaintance of an acquaintance sort of thing, I have a connection to Jeff Luno, who's the scouting director for the St. Louis Cardinals, who's a former McKinsey consultant. I was at BCG at the time, which are 2 competitive consulting firms. And I have tickets to Game 6 of the NLCS Astros and Cardinals at Busch Stadium, where I'll sit with Jeff for the part of the game, and I'll meet Mo, and I'll watch batting practice and get to talk to these guys. And that game only happens because Albert Pujols hits a home run off Brad Lidge in Houston that like left the stadium and went into orbit and never came down. And so as a Chicagoan who had been a Cub fan up until the moment I had a job offer from the Cardinals, it was the only time I ever had rooted for the Cardinals in my entire life. And I got to come down for Game 6. The Cardinals lost, but I got to go to the last game ever at Busch Stadium. I sat with Mo. I sat with Jeff. A few weeks later, they brought me back down to interview for a couple entry-level positions in baseball operations. And I think by like maybe November, early December, I had a job offer for an entry-level job with the St. Louis Cardinals. So again, based on this analytics, it all started because I did this analytical report on how to value draft picks and how to value players. The next part of my life, we did not use analytics, I think, because if we had, I don't think I would have done what I did, which is my wife and I moved our 18-month-old twin girls. My wife had just found out she was pregnant. We went to high school together in Chicago. All of our family's from Chicago. I said entry-level job in baseball, I took about a 70% pay cut from my last year at BCG to my first year with the Cardinals. And I moved to St. Louis, where we knew 0 people. We knew people who we had gone to college with who were from St. Louis, but they hadn't gone back to St. Louis. They had all gone somewhere else. Some of them have come back since then, but and we moved our family and took a chance. And I think, like saying it out loud, it sounds like the worst idea ever. I think my mother-in-law agreed at the time, but if I knew then that I would end up getting to be in World Series parades and have the success and the career I had, I certainly would have done it. At the time, I think if I had built a little mathematical model to say, is this a good idea? I probably would have been like, what are you doing to your kids' futures? Like, you have a good job, what are you doing? But anyway, ended up, my wife is a saint and let me chase my dream, and it worked out. And as was said, in 2006, I started in amateur scouting as an entry-level job. In 2008, we created an analytical department. We call it baseball development, sort of like our R&D department, and I became the director of that. Our assistant GM, a few years later, left to go to the Padres, just as I had been a director long enough that I became the assistant GM. At some point, teams started asking about interviewing Mo for president's job and me for GM jobs, so we both got promoted, which was great, because before that, I reported to Mo, and Mo reported to our owner, and after that, I reported to Mo, and Mo reported to our owner, but we got paid more, so that was a positive. And so I've been Mo's number 2 since 2011. Like I said, I've got 2 World Series rings, I've got tons of memories. It's been a great experience. And I haven't had to work in the real world ever since I got out of it in 2006. So I think one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was how we use analytics in baseball and how it's changed over time. when I started in 2006, there weren't very many teams really using analytical models and processes to make decisions. It was much more of a scout-based, experience-based kind of who had the best story or who had the funniest anecdote about the player that got you to draft him, or you know, who had been around the longest because his opinion held the most weight. We started using analytics to try to evaluate past performance in order to predict future performance, which really, if you think about what our job is, really for any organization, but especially at a baseball team, all I'm trying to do is predict what all these 18 to 35-year-old men are going to do next year. Like that's what we're trying to do, is predict what they're going to do going forward. And we found that the best way to do that is to look at what they've done in the past, to take their past performance, to adjust it for every possible adjustment that you can think of, right? Like it depends what league they were in, what level they were at, what park they played in, who their opponent was, which way the wind was blowing, who the umpire was. I mean, there's a million things you can adjust for, but ultimately you're trying to take past performance, put it into context that you can use to compare it to other people's past performance, and then use it to project future performance. And then combine that with our scouts, our experts, our people. We don't blindly use analytics. We combine it with the expert opinions of people who have a lifetime of doing and evaluating players, but we don't do one or the other. We're trying to mix them together, right? And so that's what we were doing in 2006, and at the time we were one of the few teams doing it. And so we had a lot of success identifying, you know, Matt Carpenter in the 13th round and saying, look, what he did at Texas Christian is actually really impressive, and it's actually more impressive than this other guy that, you know, did it at, you know, some small school or some SEC school, or who our scouts like because they're more athletic or they look faster or whatever. And we had a lot of success with that. And then over time, that process has become more and more complicated. So we went from having your season totals and how you did, how you performed, to having ball tracking, where we now have that we've had this for a long time now. We track the ball from the moment it leaves the pitcher's hand, how it spins, how it moves, where it crosses home plate, how hard it gets hit by the batter, how far, you know, the exit velocity, vertical and horizontal exit velocity. We have all this information. So now we can say, you know, well, you hit a double, but that's because you know, you got lucky. You hit it in the exact right spot. This other guy hit a double because he crushed it off the wall, and that's a more impressive, you know, process that will result in more doubles in the future or whatnot. Then we started having, instead of tracking just where the ball was, we could track where all the players were on the field. So we could tell you how fast a player was or what kind of jump he got on a play. We could see a ball in the gap and say, well, you were standing here and you had to get to there, and that's, you know, 96 feet, and you had 3.8 seconds based on the trajectory of the ball. So that was a easy play or an impossible play or a somewhere in between play, and do a much better job of evaluating the process that goes into the performance. Instead of just evaluating the performance, we started evaluating all the steps in between. Now we actually are able to track like your motion capture, your limbs, like the movement of your body. And we can tell a pitcher that, you know, his arm slot changes between his fastball and his slider, and that's why guys can tell a slider's coming and they don't ever swing at it, right? Or your stride length is different than it was when you were going well or whatever, right? And so when I started in 2006, I was an Excel guru. Like, that's my thing. My happy place is in an Excel spreadsheet. We will not hire people like me now because you have to know how to use SQL and R and Python to run scripts, because the amount of data we have has just exploded over the last several years. But we're still doing the same thing. We're taking all that data and trying to predict future performance for these players. The problem is that in 2006, we were the only ones using all that data. Now everyone uses all that data. There's 30 teams. There might be, I shouldn't tell you which one, but there might be one or two who aren't using that data. But basically, we're all using the same data in very similar ways to try to make predictions about future performance. So that's not where the competition really is anymore. So the competition has changed from evaluating and projecting players to helping players get better. So it's no longer just good enough to say, we choose him instead of him. You got to say, we choose him, but in order for him to be a big leaguer, he's got to ditch the slider and throw his changeup a lot more, right? Or he's got to change a grip on his fastball in order to get more run, or he's got to improve his first step in the outfield because he'll never be no matter how fast you are, if your first step is in the wrong direction half the time, you're not going to be a good outfielder. And so we have gone, as an industry, we've transitioned from evaluating to developing and improving players, and that's where the competition is. That's where you differentiate yourself from each other. I think from a business standpoint, like the analogy for me is, early on, evaluating is like all of you in whatever line of work you're in, right? You evaluate your employees, you evaluate investment options, you evaluate fundraising targets, you evaluate, right? You have a process by which you evaluate and prioritize and make predictions about what the best path is to go forward. When we did that early on, that's like a relatively simple exercise to implement because it doesn't require a ton of people to buy into it, right? Like, you only need, in order to make draft decisions based on analytics, we needed the draft decision maker to buy into the process, and that was kind of good enough. We didn't need everyone in the organization to buy in. We needed a small group of people to understand and buy in, and other people to accept it and understand it on some level, but they didn't have to completely buy into it. When you transition from making evaluations of people and decisions on who to choose to making decisions on how to make people better, how to improve them, it's like a whole different workflow of how that information travels from the analytic department out to the player, right? So now, instead of our analytics group running Python and SQL and R and stuff I don't know anything about, I don't really understand how it works, and bringing it to me, who loves data and we'll talk about it for hours, we now need to ultimately get that to an 18-year-old kid from the Dominican who didn't graduate from high school, right? Or we need to get it out to a 50-year-old pitching coach who grew up in a whole different era, who'd never learned about spin rate or axis of rotation when he was a pitcher, because that wasn't something anyone could measure or could talk about. And you need to have the messaging and the process by which that data is used be accepted by sort of everyone involved. Because if you, as an example, if we decide that this pitcher, like, your changeup is not good, but in order for you to advance to the big leagues, you need to keep throwing that bad changeup until you figure out how to throw it better, right? That's sometimes what we tell kids to do, some of our younger players, like, keep working on this weakness because you need to turn it into a strength. But the manager on that team who wants to win tonight will tell him, do not throw your changeup. It stinks and it's going to get hit hard, right? And so if he isn't part of the whole process, isn't bought into the ideas and the concept and how we think about things, then you have problems, right? And so it's a challenge. It's a different challenge from a management and leadership perspective to implement a development and improvement model using analytics than it is to implement a decision-making process using analytics. And I think in many organizations outside of baseball, there's a lot of data available, and a few people might be the data people who use it to make some decisions or to advise the CEO or whatever. But as you expand and realize how much data you have and how you can use it, and you want to use it to help a branch manager run his department better, or help a product supervisor figure out how to improve the P&L, like it's a different conversation. It's a different approach, and I think it's a challenge that honestly, that's one of the things that we're struggling with, and we need to get better at is using the data to help our players improve, to communicate it better. It just requires a whole different skill set than for a long time, we hired the smartest, nerdiest people we could possibly hire, like PhDs from Stanford and MIT grads. And at some point, you need people who can talk to those people and talk to that 18-year-old kid or that pitching coach or that manager or whoever. You need people to connect those dots, and those people are harder to find and become really important, and are one of the areas that we're trying to compete on now. So I think there are people who look, I sort of separate my baseball career from other parts of my sports fandom, right? Like there there are parts of me that I can still be a fan. Like I can still watch Notre Dame football and swear at the TV and get really angry. Whereas when I watch the Cardinals, I'm like, hey, it's 162 games. It's just sometimes things happen. I manage because I have a whole different perspective. And there are some parts of me that think that analytics in certain sports and in certain ways have made sports different or taken away some of the fun or whatever. But the way our industries are, every industry is competitive. Whatever industry you're in, you're competing against other companies, other entities, whatever it is. We are competing in a closed system where there's every game has a winner and loser, and they post the standings like every freaking day in the newspaper and on the internet, right? Like you can't pretend that you're having a good quarter when everyone can see that no, you're not. You're not going to make the playoffs. You've had a bad year 2 years in a row, right? And I think because of that, as much as anything else, it pressures all teams in all sports to use all the data they can, to squeeze everything they can out of the data. And that means a lot of, the baseball that we grew up with, like no one sacrificed bunts anymore. Like that's just not a thing because people did the math, and sacrifice bunts are really not that good of an idea. Like they feel good in the moment, but they're really not a good idea, right? In basketball, everyone shoots threes and dunks. Like no one takes a 15-footer because it's just not a good shot. Like the math says it's not a good shot, right? And so I think analytics is here to stay in sports, but I think the way analytics is being implemented, at least in baseball, we've moved from in-game decision-making and evaluating players to trying to help players get better. And I think that's the sort of thing that in any industry, as you use data and you figure out what to do with it more and more, you'll move from just evaluating investment opportunities and people and product lines to figuring out how to use data to actually improve those things, which again brings up new challenges, but brings up new opportunities to succeed. So that's so what we're gonna do now is Dan's gonna join me up here, and we're gonna transition to a Q&A. Did we tell them to text questions?
I already have questions for you.
Oh, all
They've
right.
done a very good job. So let's first of all, let's give it up for Mike right here. Give it up for Mike. So whenever they said Cardinals and microphone, I was all in for this part, so I was very excited. My name is Dan Ryder. I'm here locally as the general manager of the Springfield Cardinals. Again, we've both been a part of the Cardinal organization for 20 years, 19 years. I had hair back then. His hair is still great. But what I also learned, kind of listen to what you had to say, I also was a math nerd. And it's something I think the older I get, the more proud I was. So way to go, success for those math nerds out there. We're proud of you all. I think for everyone here, we're also very proud that the Cubs did not open up that FedEx. So we want to thank you for missing out on that. So as Mike mentioned, we've got a texting platform or a number to be able to text to be able to get some questions. Would love to get as many from the audience as possible. I've obviously got a few as well. But one of the first things that came in was that you talk a lot about the data, and kind of a simple question, where does all the data come from? Before it can be analyzed, like how are you guys going about trying to find out that data?
It's a great question. So most of the data, not most, we have lots of different sources of data that we purchase. Major League Baseball provides a lot of data at the major league level for free to all 30 teams as part of having that data for broadcast. So on the broadcast, when they show you the velocity of the pitch, or they tell you that ball went 423 feet on the home run or whatever, that's all part of a system that Major League Baseball has installed into all 30 teams. And so we get access to all that information as part of just all 30 teams. There are a variety of other ways that we purchase data. The minor leagues, a lot of teams installed similar tracking systems, and so we trade data with other teams. We purchase data from colleges who have ball tracking data at their colleges. We purchase data from aggregators who watch the games and do things like they grade every play, every defensive play, like not just error or not error, but like that was a good play or a mediocre play or a bad play, or it was a bad play because he threw to the wrong base, which doesn't actually show up in any sort of box score, but shows up elsewhere. And we also go out and we scrape the internet. So actually, when I first started, colleges didn't post. Well, when I started in 2006, in order to build a draft model, in order to build a projection model for the draft, you have to have draft or college data from like the late 1990s, right? So you can see how they did in college, then see how they did afterward in order to build a model. And at that time, we actually had the NCAA was sending us Xerox copies of stat sheets, because that's all they had was Xerox copies. And so we were data entering then, and then we went to websites and scraped data off of websites. We still scrape data off websites. Our analytics team spends a ridiculous amount of their time trying to match data from various sources to make sure that they're all matched together. So the Joe Smith who played at Texas last year, and the Joe Smith who played at Cape Cod League over the summer, and the Joe Smith who played at Texas A&M this year, is that all the same Joe Smith, or is that 3 different Joe Smiths? Or so there's a lot of data from a lot of different sources, which means sort of just bring it all together is like a huge first step in our process.
So part of that, you mentioned that everyone shares it. How do you look at how to differentiate yourself? And I think for people here, sometimes we have businesses that might be similar or aligned, but the differentiation is kind of what might lead to the behavior. How do you go from taking a shared system, but then also focusing on how the Cardinals can differentiate that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we feel strongly about is that we try to build our models and our system to apply to all of baseball everywhere. So our hitting model that projects how Mason Wynn's going to do in tonight's game is the same model, it's the same infrastructure that we use to project how a hitter in Japan right now would project if he came to Busch Stadium, or how one of our minor leaguers, if he came to Busch Stadium, or how a kid who's playing at Missouri State, if he came. We try to have all of our data together. Now, that's may seem obvious, but there's trade-offs, because you want to make sure that you get the Mason Wynn projection the most right, because that's the most important one. But if you separate and you have a major league model and a minor league model and a college model and an Asian model, and then the players who bounce around from place to place, you can't track all their data together. You end up losing track of them, or you don't have their Japanese data in with their current data because that's in a different model. And so there's ways like that we compete. I think another way we compete is just like cleaning and sorting the data. Sometimes we find that the system in in Little Rock is off by an inch on all of their pitches. Like all the pitches are coming. It says that they're below the zone, but they keep getting called strikes, so we know they must be at the bottom of the strike zone or whatever. And sometimes we used to tell the service providers that their data was wrong, and I was always like, well, how about we just fix it ourselves and let everyone else have bad data? Like that's an okay. We don't have to help everyone. Like it's okay to just.
Baseball is paid to share the data, not you. I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think you can morally accept that one at night.
And like, look, they end up fixing it because someone will say something at some point. Like if it's your stadium, you're like, hey, fix our stadium, right? But if it's somebody else's stadium, you're like, they can be off by a little bit. That's all right. So, and the models that we create are very complicated. Like a model to predict like how good a slider will be based on its velocity, spin rate, vertical movement, horizontal movement, release point, where it crosses home plate, whether it's to a righty or lefty, what the count is. Like these are really complicated models. So even giving the same 30 teams the same information, you won't get the same results anyway. So you're trying to compete on just making good decisions and building models, accurately.
That reflect in a lot of different ways. Like I think that's a key that you said there. In your own story, you kind of mentioned, kind of a little bit of the power of your gut, and you kind of went against analytics to take a job with the Cardinals, and I think 70% cut made all of us cringe a little bit. But that was kind of a decision based on gut. And one of the questions that came in was, how do you take into all the data and think of the mental part of baseball, whether that's a high baseball IQ, whether that's heart, leadership, feel. How do you take maybe some of those things that are more subjective and try to put that into your guys' equation?
I would say that when we do our projections for players, we don't really incorporate that information. Like it is somewhat incorporated. So for example, like there's little things like hitting a triple is a combination of, hitting the ball far and being fast, but it also means that you probably like hustled your ass off out of the box, and like little things like that will sometimes show up as like being worth more than they really should be in our models, because it is an indicator of something that it's capturing something like some intangible thing. It's sort of capturing it on accident. I think one of the things we benefited from early on when I was with the Cardinals is that when we were doing this analytics models, we were drafting players who were good performers. They were good baseball players who were undervalued by the baseball industry for one reason or another. Often because like they weren't as tall as they should be, they weren't as fast as they should be, they didn't look the part, right? For whatever reason, they often were at lesser colleges. They weren't top, recruits, or they were at a great college, but they weren't the guy that everyone was focused on. Sometimes it was like literally like the shortstop was getting all the attention, and we liked the guy next to him better because that guy was like 6'3" and super athletic, and this guy was 5'9", but actually was just better. Like he was just better at baseball. And as a result of that, we tended to get guys who were grinders and who weren't handed anything to them. And so we got a bunch of guys like Descalzo and Jay and Carpenter and Craig and all these guys who were sort of overachievers just to get to the point to be drafted, and then just kept being overachievers. They had a different mindset. They had a different sort of approach to sports. So the reality is the way we incorporate that information is sort of outside the model. Like we don't draft straight off our model. We don't sign free agents straight off our model. We don't fill out the lineup card. Like everything that we do is, here's a really well thought out starting point. Now what are we missing, right? Sometimes it's, well, this guy's injured, or this guy learned a new pitch in the middle of the season, so we're projecting him off of data that's no longer relevant, or how he treats his teammates, or how he gets along with people, or how he impacts other people in other ways, are all things that are why we aren't just running our whole team off ChatGPT, right? You got to have a feel for the other stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's very valuable for everyone as a business leader, is that we have information, we have numbers, we have data, but that importance of the feel and knowing when to go outside. Do you personally have any sort of litmus test on when you feel that it's important to follow the numbers versus those kind of intangible things that you mentioned? Is there anything that you kind of ask yourself that maybe would be helpful to us in our decision making?
I think the biggest thing is that the decision makers have to understand what's in the model and what's not. As someone who came up through the organization building models and being intimately involved in them, I generally have a good feel for what's in it and what's not. And when someone says yes, but he's really tall, you're like, dude, that's not a thing. Like that's not why we're ignoring the model, right? Like, but if you say, well, he was injured last year and playing through an injury in order to help his team, and that's why his power went down, and then you can see this year his power is back and you're like, okay, that's actual information that we can't put into a model because we don't have that kind of information. And I think the biggest thing is when you take the model from the group who built it to the group who's going to implement it. I don't know that we've always done a perfect job teaching the people who are going to implement it what's in there and what isn't. And if they don't know what's in there and what isn't, then they will assume they'll assume that the model's missing whatever would get them to the answer they want it to be, right? If I want to pinch hit here, and I'm not exactly sure how you guys do your head-to-head matchup model, so I'm going to assume that you forgot that this guy did really well yesterday, and that must be worth a lot. So and so then you're not really using the model; you're just sort of working your way around the model to do what you want, right? So I think an important part of it is understanding when to make when to take the step to overrule it or whatever. It depends on so many factors that I don't have like a rule of thumb or anything. But if you don't understand exactly how it works, you're kind of destined to make bad overrule.
I actually think it's a great answer of trying to understand what it is you're putting into it. And we'll turn this into the Dr. Carol Taylor portion, where it's her third class ticket. Is they know what's going on, they're able to help out. But one of the other things that I noticed she said was today was to honor the past, but don't live there. And I think that you mentioned, the history of the Cardinals and everything that's gone into there. When you show up to Busch Stadium, how do you be able to try to balance that of honoring the past but not living there? Because obviously a big part of your role is to look ahead. How do you try to find that balance of honoring the past but not living there?
Yeah, I think one of the things that as an organization we do really well is celebrating our history. I was lucky enough when I started on opening day, the first couple years I was around, we had like Stan Musial and Bob Gibson and Lou Brock, and like we didn't have like Cardinal Hall of Famers. We had like baseball Hall of Famers, and not just Hall of Famers, like the best left-handed hitter of like, or one of the top couple of our lifetimes, and one of the best starting pitchers of our life. Like, you have to celebrate that, right? You got to take advantage of that and have those people be around. And I don't expect Bob Gibson to go talk to one of our young players about the spin rate on his his slider, right? Like, it's not that doesn't matter. Like, that's not what his value or what value he brings to a conversation. So I think part of what we are always trying to balance is having people around who appreciate what it means to be a Cardinal and what Cardinal success has been in the past, and how to take that forward, but also not to just say, well, this worked in the past, so we're going to keep doing it, right? Like, as I said, it's a competitive industry. There's a standings and a scoreboard, and everyone knows exactly where you stand, and everyone's moving, and if you don't keep moving, you end up in a bad spot, right? And so trying to balance the history and the success of our organization without getting complacent is a challenge, and something that we just are always trying to make the right decision.
Again, I think very relevant to all of us in our positions and the people that came before us and what we've done. You did mention there, you wouldn't expect Bob Gibson to start talking about the spin rates. And obviously the game has changed. Baseball's sharing the data. They're putting it on broadcast. One of the questions from the audience was that you hear all about WAR now. So could you maybe give the audience maybe just kind of a quick synopsis of what WAR is? And maybe they also said, if you could compare that, what they hear about WAR, what does that mean for a player like Nolan Arenado?
Okay. So WAR is wins above replacement. The basic concept is, in order to value in anything you do, right? In order to value an employee, the question is, how much value do they bring above what you could get from somebody else, right? Like, a salesperson's value is how many extra sales they get above if you hired a kid out of college. It's not all of the sales they get, because if they left tomorrow, you wouldn't replace them with nothing. You would put somebody into that role, and that person would be less experienced and do a less well job, but they would still make some sales. Maybe this is a terrible analogy, but in baseball, if Nolan Arenado gets hurt, we don't play without a third baseman, right? We call up a kid from Springfield or from Memphis to go stand at third base and do his best. And he's not going to go 0 for the season. He's going to get some hits, and he's going to occasionally drive in a run. He's going to make most of the plays at third base, and sometimes he'll make an error. And so there's a concept of replacement level player. That's the player that is basically freely available that you can go put into a lineup, and that's the baseline. Like, that's where we start from. Your value is only above that, right? That part of the value is just sort of a given to any baseball team. And then what wins above replacement tries to do is quantify your hitting skills, your base running skills, your defensive skills, for pitchers, your pitching skills, how well you performed, and then compare that to that baseline, and then translate that into a number of wins. And so there's different ways to look at all of these things. You can do defense in a ton of different ways. You can evaluate pitching with or without the help of the defenders behind you, or with or without the catcher framing. And there's lots of ways. The actual implementation of a wins above replacement model is very different depending on how you want to do it. And all 30 teams probably have slightly different versions of their wins above replacement. But the concept of there's a replacement level that's basically free to teams. We then compare your performance above that across all the different ways that you can help on the baseball field, and then quantify that into wins. So Nolan Arenado, like, for example, this year, Nolan's been, I'm ballparking here, roughly a league average hitter. But league average, you could say, well, he's 0 runs, like average is just 0. But if we had to call a kid up from Memphis, he would hit well below average, right? So there's some value that Arenado's providing by just being a league average hitter. He's an above average defender. And again, if we called somebody up, when we have guys in Memphis, we'd call up Cesar Prieto, or we'd call up somebody, and he would go stand there, and he would be a slightly below average third baseman. So Arenado's got a few runs for that. I'm not gonna lie. Nolan's really slow. Like he's a terrible base runner because he's really slow. So he's giving up a few runs on the bases, and so you add up some positive from hitting, some positive from defense, take away a little bit for his base running, and you get to a value of, I don't know, Nolan's probably a 2.5 win player or something like that this year. And doing it in wins, you could do it in runs, you could do it like sort of the currency in which you measure it is sort of whatever you want it to be, but you have to figure out a way to turn singles, doubles, triples, and homers, and errors, and great defensive plays, and stolen bases, and tagging up, and not getting thrown out on a double play, and put all those into the same language so that you can then compare them to, and put them into a common language that WAR is the common language that baseball uses to talk about the value of a player.
So if any of you want to convince the boss or owner that your WAR is better than who they would bring in. So yes.
We talk about like lunch relative to replacement level. Like this is a replacement level lunch place. This is an above replacement level. Like that's a thing that becomes part of the
common everywhere in baseball. I absolutely love that. So a couple different questions came in different versions of it. Kind of talk about old guard, new guard, and several times in kind of your talk. You talked about the importance of everyone knowing the language, of trying to be able to get buy-in. How do you try to get that buy-in from maybe people who aren't receptive to change? And obviously the timing of when you came in the organization, that's a very dramatic shift from all scouts making a decision to kind of using the data. How would you recommend when you have people maybe that aren't trying to buy into the vision or the mission of the company, how do you try to transition them over to kind of the new path?
Well, I think in 2006 is very different than it is today, in that in 2006 and 2007, the idea of analytics in the draft room or in the process was like, it wasn't clear that was going to happen, right? There was like a battle going on, and there were people who thought, if I just ignore these guys, or if I just power through this, we'll defeat them, they'll go away, and it'll be back to the way it used to be. Those people with that attitude ended up getting out of the game, honestly. Like they didn't survive. People who were like, I don't like this, I don't get it, but let me understand it better, and we're open to just being like a lifetime learner, like just open to new things, did great. And in a lot of ways, those people had huge success, because if they had the old skills and knowledge and history of watching and playing and being around baseball for years, and could then also integrate some of the analytics, they had a toolkit that nobody else did, right? Like the nerdy kids like me showed up with the analytics, and like I've never been in a clubhouse before. I don't know. I'm not going to go talk to Chris Carpenter. He's mean and scary, right? Like I'm not going to. Someone else do that. Now we're in a different landscape where the whole industry, like all of sports, knows that analytics are a thing, and they're part of it, right? And so I think it's different now in that there's not really a battle. It's more of everyone trying to figure out kind of what their role is and how they fit and where they can add value and what battles are worth fighting, and it's a different environment now. So, but again, it comes back to people who want to learn and want to get better. I think when we look at hiring, the most important question for me is what do you do to get better at your job, right? Like what books are you reading, what podcasts do you listen to, what websites do you visit, like just anything. As long as you have something, like good. And if you're like, oh, I don't really, like didn't I tell you I played 10 years in the minors? It's like, yeah, that's not really the kind of person that we're looking for. We're looking for people who are always trying to figure out ways to get better. And so I think that's the biggest thing. It's not that you understand it today or that you buy into it today. It's that you're willing to listen and consider the fact that there might be a better way to do things.
Yeah, and you can clap. Does anyone want to clap for that one? That was a really good one. Yeah, that was great. Thank you, the first person that started that. Thank you.
You sound surprised that was a good one. What's to say about all my other answers today, Dan?
Well, what does that tell you? I mean, that's on you. That's not on me. No. But you also touched on something there in a few different times about communication. And there's different types of people that, whether they have their head down on the computer screen or they're always on the field, and I think all of us in our own workplaces, there's very different communication styles. when you know that someone kind of speaks a different language, how do you look to bridge that? And I think you've really heard about this a lot throughout your entire speech, but just I think any tips you have on how to bridge those different types of communication, I think would be very helpful for all of us in our positions.
I think, first of all, one thing, Chris Carpenter is actually a really nice guy. He's just scary as hell when he's pitching, so that was a bad example. Good guy.
Well, and he actually, there's still a sheet posted in our coach's locker room of advice that he gave the players. And just anytime he would come in, you would always see the way that the players would listen to him and respect him. So I'll chime in on that. Very, very great guy when he's been around the clubhouse.
What was the question again?
Communication and
yes.
kind of bridging the different styles.
Okay, so what I would say is, especially in any sort of leadership role, I feel like your job is to meet someone where they are when you try to communicate to them. It's not to expect them to meet you where you are in your communication style, or the words you're going to use, or the acronyms you're going to use, or the inside lingo that they're not going to understand. Like, your job is to meet people where they are, and hopefully, slowly like bring them to the same level, the same concepts, the same way you want to communicate. But I think the biggest thing that is a challenge is when two people don't even know where each other are, right? When it's someone who's got very different backgrounds and you're not even clear, like, how far back do I have to go to start? Where is our baseline, right? Like sometimes when I do talks like this, more focused on baseball, I'm like, do you guys know how the minor leagues work, right? What do I have to explain in order to
I would
have
hope
this
the answer in Springfield is yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. But like, if I went to like London to do this conversation, I'd be like, I don't even know where to start. Like, have you guys baseball? Anyone? Do you guys even know what's going on, right? So I think the challenge is when you're just starting out and you don't even know kind of where your shared knowledge is and where your shared language is. It's hard to get started. But when you're the one trying to move and change people, like, it's on you to go reach out and pull them along. You can't just sort of walk away and hope that they follow. Like, that doesn't seem like it's ever going to work.
I think if the general manager of the St. Louis Cardinals is willing to do that, I think it's a great reminder for everyone in our workforces as well. So we're kind of getting close to wrapping this up here. What do you think the future of the industry holds? Whether it's AI, ABS, which is kind of the automated strike zone with the umpires. What do you view the future of the industry as?
Well, I do think ABS is coming, the automated ball strikes. I think it'll come in a challenge system. So for those of you who don't know, so we have systems throughout the majors and at AAA and at parts of the lowest level of minors that will just where the ball crossed home plate and can just tell you almost instantly whether it was a ball or a strike. We've tested it a few different ways. We've tested it where the ABS system calls every pitch and the umpire just has an earpiece. He just waits until the earpiece tells him ball or strike, and then he indicates it. And we've also tested it where the umpire calls every pitch, but the catcher, the pitcher, and the hitter are each allowed, any of that group are allowed to challenge the pitch, but they have to challenge it right away. They can't wait for the dugout to tell them. They can't wait for the analytics nerds to somehow indicate, hey, that you should challenge that one. But they have to challenge it right away, and if they challenge it right away, then on the scoreboard they play. Everyone who watches tennis, when they do like a challenge on the tennis system, and they don't actually show the ball like a video, they show like a video game of the ball. That would be the same thing. They don't show the pitch, they show like a video game replica of the pitch and whether it was ball or strike. I think what we have found is that we as an industry, not we the Cardinals, but we as an industry have found is that if you put in an automated ball strike system and have it call every pitch, the umpire becomes kind of meaningless and loses his focus. Like, it's impossible for him to focus. So if the system ever goes down or misses a pitch, there's no way the umpire was paying attention. He's been sitting back. The system is good like 999 times out of 1,000, but that once of 1,000, that's once a week. So we can't expect the umpire to pay attention for the one time a week he's going to have to make a decision, right? It also means that if the system's going to be called automated, then what happens when it's 12-0 and everybody agrees that we should just like call strikes and go home, right? Or when a left fielder's coming in to pitch because it's a blowout and everyone agrees just like, let's move this along, right? There's no ability to do any of that stuff. It also means that the catcher has no reason to like, I'm exaggerating to make a point, but like why even catch the ball? Like squatting down and getting hit by foul tips, that stinks. I'll just stand over here and let it go to the screen and let the system call it a ball or a strike, and I'll go pick it up and throw it back, right? Like, so the more we've done testing, the industry, the players have reacted, coaches who've used it in the minor leagues, the commissioner's office, I think the challenge system is where it's going to end up, where each team gets a couple challenges. The challenges are very quick. They're up on the scoreboard, so the fans are all sort of like part of the process. They, along with all the pitcher and the hitter, all look up to see what happens, and they all react together and get mad together or get happy together. But I think that's coming. I think probably not next year, maybe not, maybe the year after, maybe not. But like when we think about how we value catcher's defense, we are starting to think that that's a thing that's coming in the future, and that we should adjust for that. In terms of other things, like I think one of the biggest challenges for baseball in particular, because of the unnatural act of throwing a baseball, but for all sports, is just trying to keep your athletes healthy. Fans want to come watch the best in the world. We pay the best in the world a lot of money. The best in the world want to set records and accomplish things. Like, we all have the same incentive to keep them healthy, but it's really hard. They're at the edge of like human physical ability. We're asking them to do things that the body's not made to do. Like, it's not made to throw 102 miles an hour. It's not made to throw 100 pitches every 5 days. Like, these are unnatural acts. And so the ability of any team or organization or league to figure out how to keep their players healthier, I think, is a huge leap forward for the whole sport. But it's really hard. And we've been trying to figure out how to keep pitchers healthy before I got here, and definitely for the 19 years I've been here, and we are like no better than we were 19 years ago. Which it might be that they all keep throwing harder, so we're keeping them healthier longer so they can throw even harder, but they just keep going to the point. There's a lot of incentives to push yourself to the point that you break, because right up until that point you get paid millions and millions of dollars, so people are willing to take chances and push themselves. So the more we can help players figure out how to stay healthy, I think that's a huge thing that everyone's trying to solve.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a few rapid-fire questions here as Marty comes up to the stage to help close us out here. So just a few more. What one book would you recommend that people read? You kind of talked about enjoying learners, so and you can say book or podcast that you would recommend for people.
You should read Moneyball, because that's how I got my it kind of changed my life in a way. So I should probably write Michael Lewis like a thank you note or something. There's a book called Psychology of Money. I can't think of the guy's name who wrote it. That's really good about how you think about and position like money and success in your life determines how you should think about the other decisions that I like a lot.
Okay. As you talk about learning, have you had a mentor that you really appreciate what they've done for you?
There's a lot of people in baseball who, when I started out, put up with a kid who got cut from every high school baseball team he ever tried out with, and probably thought he knew a lot more about how baseball worked than he did. So there's a number of people in the organization who invested in me. But honestly, like my first letter went to the Cardinals, went to Mo. I interviewed with Mo for my first job. I've reported to Mo for the last 17 years. It'd be hard to answer anyone but Mo as my baseball mentor.
That's very cool. So you mentioned Chris Carpenter, so you can't answer him. But you've been around a lot of the baseball players. Is there one that you think of as just a great person? Has nothing to do with on-field ability, but I feel like there's lots of questions that people like to ask about the players. Is there one or two that maybe stick out as just great people?
Yeah, I think Paul Goldschmidt is an amazing person. There's Matt Carpenter. There's a lot of guys. Chris Carpenter is a really good person. Adam Wainwright's an amazing guy. There's a number of guys who've been very Matt Holliday. I mean, there's a lot of really good players. There's a lot of guys like the Dan Descalzos, the Greg Garcias. Like, there's a lot of like under the radar, lower profile guys who are really great people. Just one quick story, like John Jay is a really good guy. John Jay was in the first draft. We drafted him in the first draft I was ever part of in 2006. He went to University of Miami in Florida along with Chris Perez, who we also drafted. They played in the College World Series. They came to Busch Stadium to do their physicals after we had the draft was like 3 weeks before the College World Series, so these guys came late. So I picked them up at the airport, drove him to the doctor's office, sat with Jay while Chris Perez is a pitcher, so he got like 7 MRIs, whereas Jay just got like, are you healthy? And he was like, yes. And they're like, all right, good, you're fine, because Jay was an outfielder. So Jay and I sat while we waited for Perez to get all these MRIs and talked for a while, and then I took him down to Busch Stadium. Mo signed their contracts. We got him dinner. I sat with him behind home plate. We watched Izzy almost blow a save, but then the Cardinals walked it off, and it was great. And then I drove them to the airport, and they went off, and they started their minor league careers. And that was in 2006. And in 2011, we win the World Series. Jay's our starting center fielder. After we win the World Series, I'm part of the group that comes running out of the dugout and onto the field, and I see Jay. And I give Jay a big bro hug, and I'm like, remember when you were just a college kid starting out? And he's like, yeah, and you were the intern who had to pick me up. And I was like, I was a full-time employee, Jay. I was a full-time employee at the time. I had benefits, I had medical, no. But that was like the first guy who I felt like, in 2006 I started, in 2006 we won a World Series. I had nothing to do with it. I was processing expense reports and trying to get medicals done for the draft. By 2011, there were players I had drafted, players I've been part of getting them into the organization and making decisions. And Jay was one of those guys who is just a great guy who, partially because we knew each other when we were both starting out, we sort of like kind of grew up in baseball together. He's now first base coach with the Marlins, so I see him at spring training every year. And he's just, again, one of those sort of lower profile, like just a really good dude who the relationships that make the job fun.
That's great. All right, final two here. Baseball has a lot of rituals and superstitions. Do you have any that you have, whether it's a game day, or do you have any rituals or superstitions for yourself?
I would say no, but there are 2 security guards, one at the visiting clubhouse and one at the home clubhouse. And every day when I walk down to the home clubhouse, I give knuckles to the visiting guy, I give knuckles to the home guy, I go in the home club, and on the way back out, I have to give knuckles to both of them as I go back to my office. And it doesn't seem to be working, but I keep doing it.
I think so no, but yes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'd like to say no because I'm supposed to be an analytical guy.
Right. Well, we can switch up the
yes.
equation, and you can start one with knucks and one with high fives moving forward. Okay. We'll change the equation for you. And here's our last question before Marty closes this out. Just what's your final piece of advice for the audience? I think you've got a captive group that we've all been excited for a while to be able to hear this conversation. And kind of what would be your parting advice for this group that's been excited for you today?
That's a lot of pressure. I would say I have made a living of using data to answer questions that people say, well, like that's intangible, or you can't measure that, or like, well, you can always kind of measure it. Like in our sport, we have so much data. You can, like, tell me something's unmeasurable, and I'll figure out a way to at least try. I think there are a lot of decisions, a lot of business decisions, life decisions, whatever, that you can, if you take your time and think about it, figure out ways to use data to help you make better decisions. And I would encourage you to do that. And I would encourage you, once you've done that, to then ignore the data and make the decision that's right for you, regardless of what the data says. But if you don't use some basic analysis and have some basic idea of sort of what like the averages are, what's the norm, what's the most likely outcome, then you're just guessing, right? So like use whatever's available to try to get yourself to have a good starting point, and then make your decision at least with the knowledge of what the starting point is, and I think it puts you in a better spot.
All right, let's have a big round of applause for the Cardinals general manager, Mike Girsch.
Great job, guys. What a moderator. Knuckles, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Dan. What a team. So we're coming up on the lunch break. So for our exhibitors, we will have lunch for you in our Rick's Automotive hospitality area, which is back here towards the load-in dock, and then we've got some tables. Also for everyone else, the concessions are open, so you'll be able to grab lunch and plenty of flexibility and places to sit. And then we've got some a nice surprise for you that Angela Davis, Director of Sales for Silver Dollar City, is going to share. Please welcome Angela.
Thank you. Good morning. Oh, they're right. You have your Taylor Swift moment for sure. I would like to start off real quick with a show of hands. Who knows Silver Dollar City for roller coasters and thrills? Show of hands. There you go. I might need you to hoop and holler to help me so I can see. Okay. If you enjoy our shows and our festivals, how about another hoop or holler or raise of hands? Okay, there we go. And if you love everything that's traditional about Silver Dollar City, things like all new Fire in the Hole, things like our crafts and our just the history of Silver Dollar City, raise your hand, hoot and holler. Okay, great. Great. So one thing that I would really like to know is how many of you know that Silver Dollar City can be your employee incentives, thank yous to your employees, your team building activities, your Christmas outings, your celebrations, just ways to connect with your team. If you knew that, raise your hand. If you've ever done that, raise your hand. So that is what there you go, Dan. Yes, he's brought his team out. We are here today not only to share with you our Highland ice cream, our all new s'mores Fire in the Hole ice cream, but we're also here to talk to you all about incentives, how you can reward your employees with our corporate benefits, all different types of pass programs. We have season pass discounts when you buy in bulk through us. We also have discounted tickets that we provide to you to gift to your employees throughout the year. You're welcome to come as a group or come on any day of the year. So we'd love the opportunity while you're here enjoying ice cream just after lunch. Please allow us to share some of those opportunities and incentives that we have with you. And I think that wraps it up for lunch.
Thank you again. So at noon, Ice Cream Social will be in the Silver Dollar City area. Starting at 1, we have 2 events happening. We have a CEO roundtable that will be hosted by Christine Temple, our executive editor at SBJ, around regionalism. And then we will, for anyone that has signed up for the Biz Blitz, that will actually be in the upstairs VIP room hosted by the Springfield Chamber of Commerce at 1 o'clock as well. I want to thank Grooms for this continually awesome stage design, and they will you'll see more furniture from them through the day. So enjoy lunch, and we'll see you soon.